This field of study came about because I was a junior professor wanting to understand how people got promoted to tenure. So I started working with the NSF Survey of Doctorate Recipients, and I was looking at the determinants of pay and promotion in academia because I had a vested interest in understanding how it worked. And I did a lot of work on women in science, and then I got contacted 5 years ago to start doing work with NIH on looking at race, ethnicity, and outcomes for biomedical researchers. Study what you're interested in. You may be interested in it. Other people may not be interested in it, but as long as you care about it, someone will care too. I mean, I started doing this research, nobody was really looking at women in science, and then the National Academies started looking at women in science, and that sort of opportunity led to this opportunity to work with the NIH because I was off doing something that interested me. Well, so I'm a social scientist, so there's not a lot of experiments being done. I've had lots of bad experiments in the kitchen. You get to study what you care about. You get to ask questions and go about answering them. And, that's a wonderful opportunity to just, inquire, ask the right questions, and work hard to get the answers. And, when you start along a research track, what happens is that research begets research so that it just grows and you go along with it. Persistence. Science is very competitive, and you have to be sort of convinced that you're right in order to convince other people you're right. And so you have to keep at it. There's a lot of, negative feedback. Your papers get rejected, your grants get rejected, but you have to sort of get mad, get over it, and get back at it, right? And so you sort of deal with the criticism because it's not personalized in most cases, and you deal with the criticism, address it, and that makes your science better. So you have to be persistent. You have to have a thick skin and just, be convinced. You have to be your toughest critic, and if you can convince yourself, then you can convince other people as well. Well, my research that I'm known for is looking at race, ethnicity, and federal research funding. And the societal benefits is trying to sort of, level the playing field so that everyone has the opportunity to be successful and to be a scientist. The demographics of the US are changing, and the scientific community is largely white and male. And who are going to be the scientists of the future? That was the question that prompted this research. And then when we got into it, we saw sort of the barriers to diversity in the scientific workforce happening very early at high school, and again at the transition to graduate school. And then we looked at, well, what happens when they get the PhD? Are they equally likely to get funding in biomedicine? And the answer was, unfortunately, no. And so as a result, the National Institutes of Health in December announced a $500 million 10-year program to increase the diversity of the scientific workforce. The biggest influence on my thinking were sort of personal, sort of like trust yourself, do what you care about. And so I got that advice from colleagues of mine. So there was a colleague, Mary Olson, when we were both at Washington University, saying, you have to like your own research in order to be successful. And that piece of advice was wonderful. My husband, who said, you as a researcher get to convince people when you know more about it than anybody else. So trust yourself, trust your instincts. And so those personal influences, I think, really have influenced my research more than anything else. And I would add another influence on my research has been my children. Because my children, when you don't have kids, you have more time, and so you're able to sort of, second guess yourself all the time. When you have kids, then your time is much more concentrated, and so I became a much more focused, effective, and efficient researcher because I had children and I had something besides my research to think about. So it sort of gave me a balance in my life that made me a better researcher. Oh, what surprises people about economists is that they don't study the economy. A lot of economists do not study the economy. I got into economics because I'm interested in the economy and I follow it, and I was at the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, and I started at the Federal Reserve Board as an undergrad coming out. So I am very interested in the economy, but you know, economists study so many different aspects of human behavior. Economics is a social science, and it looks at how people make decisions, it looks at incentives, it looks at markets, how people interact with markets. And so people ask me, well, what's going to happen to taxes? And I'm like, well, that's a good question. I don't study, you know, public finance, but, you know, if Congress will eventually figure out how to tax us, right? You know, so I think that the fact that economists aren't sort of dealing with the nuts and bolts of the economy in their research would surprise people a lot. My laptop. I play NPR. I used to listen to music when I was working, and you know, there's all this research about multitasking, and you know, I find music really distracting. I listen to music when I walk the dogs, but when I'm doing my research, it's quiet.